The rain fell hard on the windows of Westbrook Music Academy as 12-year-old Mei Lin Chen walked through the front doors for her weekly piano lesson. She was always early because her mother dropped her off on the way to work at the family laundry business across town. Mei Lin would sit in the corner of the waiting room with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the floor. She never talked to the other students and they never talked to her. The academy was housed in a beautiful old building with high ceilings and wooden floors that creaked with every step. Grand pianos sat in every practice room and the walls were covered with photographs of famous musicians who had once studied there. It was the kind of place that made you feel small if you did not belong, and Mei Lin always felt like she did not belong. Her clothes were not like the other students' clothes. While they wore designer dresses and pressed shirts, Mei Lin wore hand-me-downs from her older cousins and shoes that were one size too big. Her mother had sewn patches on her backpack to cover the holes, and her piano books were second-hand, with someone else's notes written in the margins. The other students came from wealthy families in the nicest part of town. Their parents were doctors and lawyers and business owners who drove expensive cars and lived in big houses with swimming pools. Mei Lin's parents were Chinese immigrants who had come to America with almost nothing 15 years ago. They worked 16 hours a day running a small laundry shop in a poor neighborhood. They barely spoke English and they knew nothing about classical music, but they believed in education and they believed in their daughter. Every month they scraped together the money for her discounted piano lessons, even when it meant skipping meals themselves. Mei Lin knew how much they sacrificed for her. She could see it in her mother's tired eyes and her father's rough hands. That knowledge sat heavy on her chest like a strong. She wanted so badly to make them proud, but she was starting to wonder if she ever would. The head instructor at the academy was a tall, thin woman named Mrs. Harrington. She had gray hair, pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore pearl earrings that clicked when she moved her head. Mrs. Harrington had been teaching piano for over 40 years, and she believed she could spot talent. The moment a student walked through the door, she looked at their posture and their hands and the way they carried themselves. She listened to how they spoke and watched how they moved in. Within 5 minutes, she would decide if a student was worth her time or not. When Mrs. Harrington first met Mei Lin 2 years ago, she made her decision quickly. She saw a shy, quiet girl in worn-out clothes who could barely look her in the eye. She saw immigrant parents who smiled too much and understood too little. She saw a student who would never amount to anything special. From that day on, Mrs. Harrington treated Mei Lin like she was invisible. During group lessons, she would walk right past Mei Lin's seat without even glancing at her. She would praise other students for their progress and their potential while Mei Lin sat in silence. When Mei Lin raised her hand to ask a question, Mrs. Harrington would often pretend not to see her hand. When she did call on Mei Lin, her voice would become flat and bored, like she was wasting her time. The other students noticed how Mrs. Harrington treated Mei Lin. Children are quick to understand who has power and who does not. They learned that Mei Lin was someone they could ignore or mock without any consequences. The worst of them was a girl named Jessica Price. Jessica was the mayor's daughter, and she had been taking piano lessons since she was 4 years old. She had long blonde hair and perfect teeth, and she always wore the most expensive clothes. Jessica was talented, but she was also cruel. She would make comments about Mei Lin's clothes when the teachers were not listening. She would laugh at Mei Lin's accent when she spoke. She would roll her eyes whenever Mei Lin played during group practice. Once, Jessica told Mei Lin that people like her should stick to working in laundry shops instead of pretending to be musicians. Mei Lin did not respond. She just looked down at her hands and waited for the moment to pass. That was what she always did. She made herself small and quiet and hoped that no one would notice. It was easier that way, but deep inside her chest something was burning. It was a feeling she could not name. It was anger and sadness and hunger all mixed together. Every time Mrs. Harrington ignored her, that feeling grew a little stronger. Every time Jessica laughed at her, that feeling grew a little hotter. Mei Lin did not know what to do with this feeling, so she pushed it down deep where no one could see it. She told herself that it did not matter what these people thought of her. She told herself that one day things would be different. She just had to be patient. She just had to wait. After her lessons, Mei Lin would walk to her parents' laundry shop, which was about 2 miles from the academy. She liked the walk because it gave her time to think. She would replay the music in her head note by note. She would imagine herself on a big stage in front of thousands of people. In her imagination, she was not the poor immigrant girl in second-hand clothes. She was a great pianist, and everyone was watching her with amazement in their eyes. These daydreams kept her going. They were her secret treasure that no one could take away. The laundry shop was a small, cramped space, squeezed between a pawn shop and a convenience store. The sign out front said Chen Family Laundry in faded red letters. Inside, the air was always hot and damp, and it smelled like soap and steam. Mei Lin's mother worked at the front counter, taking orders and making change. Her father worked in the back, running the big machines and pressing clothes. They worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, 7 days a week. Mei Lin would do her homework on a small table in the corner while her parents worked. She would help fold clothes and sort laundry when they got busy and late. At night, when the last customer had gone, she would sit at the old broken piano in the storage room and play. That piano was her real teacher. That piano was her best friend. That piano was the only place in the world where Mei Lin Chen felt like she truly belonged. No one at the academy knew about this piano. No one knew about the hours she spent practicing alone in the dark. No One knew about the music that lived inside her heart, and for now that was exactly how Mei Lin wanted it to be. She was not ready to show them who she really was, but one day soon she would be. One day soon everything would change. The piano in the storage room had arrived on a cold winter night 3 years before this story begins. The customer had brought in a load of fancy clothes for dry cleaning and mentioned that he needed to get rid of an old piano his wife had bought. A new one, and the old instrument was taking up space in their garage. He asked Mei Lin's father if he knew anyone who wanted either. Father said yes before he even thought about ETH. Did not know anything about pianos, but he knew his daughter loved music. That night, the customer and 2 of his friends carried the heavy piano into the back room of the laundry shop. It barely fit through the door, and they had to take the legs off to get it inside. When they finally set it up in the corner, Mei Lin's father called her over to see. Mei Lin remembered that moment like it was yesterday. She walked into the storage room and saw the piano sitting there between stacks of clean towels and boxes of soap. It was old and scratched and covered in dust. 3 of the keys in the upper register were missing completely. The wood was cracked in several places and one of the pedals was stuck, but to Mei Lin, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She sat down on an overturned milk crate and pressed her fingers to the keys. The sound that came out was terrible. The piano was badly out of tune and some of the strings buzzed with a metallic rattle, but Mei Lin did not care. She played a simple scale from low to high and back down again. Her mother and father stood in the doorway watching her with tired smiles on their faces. They did not understand music, but they understood the look of joy on their daughter's face. From that night on, the storage room became Mei Lin's secret world. Every evening, after the shop closed, she would slip through the door and sit at her broken piano. She would practice for hours while her parents cleaned up and prepared for the next day. Sometimes she would play until midnight or even later. Her mother would bring her tea and her father would remind her to go to bed, but Mei Lin could not stop. The music called to her like a voice in the darkness. At first she practiced the simple songs she learned at the academy. She played them over and over until her fingers knew them by heart, but soon those songs were not enough. She wanted more. She wanted to play the music she heard on her father's old cassette player. Her father had brought a small collection of cassette tapes from China when he emigrated. Most of them were recordings of Chinese opera, but a few were classical piano music. One tape in particular changed Mei Lin's life. It was a recording of a Polish pianist playing the works of Frédéric Chopin. Mei Lin did not know who Chopin was at first. She had never heard his name at the academy, where Mrs. Harrington focused on simpler pieces for beginners, but when she pressed play on that old cassette player and heard the first notes of a Chopin nocturne, she felt something shift inside her soul. The music was sad and beautiful and full of longing. It spoke to her in a language she did not need to learn. It said everything she could not say with words. From that moment on, Mei Lin became obsessed. She listened to that tape every night until she had memorized every note. Then she sat at her broken piano and tried to play what she heard. It was impossibly hard at first. The pieces were meant for professional pianists with years of training. Mei Lin had only her ears and her determination. She would listen to a few seconds of the recording, then try to copy it on her piano. Sometimes it took her a whole week just to learn one page of music. She made mistakes constantly. Her fingers were not strong enough and her hands were not big enough, but she never gave up. Night after night she practiced in that hot, cramped storage room. She taught herself how to read the expression in the music, not just the note sheet. Learned to feel the rhythm in her body and let it guide her hands. She discovered that music was not just about playing the right keys at the right time. It was about telling a story. It was about opening your heart and letting something true come out. Over the next 3 years, Mei Lin worked her way through all the tapes in her father's collection. She learned Chopin nocturnes and waltzes and polonaises. So she learned Beethoven sonatas and Mozart concertos. She discovered Rachmaninoff and fell in love with his dark, dramatic style. She found recordings of Franz Liszt and gasped at the impossible speed and power of his compositions. Each new piece was a mountain to climb. Some took weeks to learn, some took months, but Mei Lin climbed every one of them. The hardest part was doing it alone. She had no teacher to guide her and no one to tell her if she was doing it right. She had to figure everything out by herself. When her hands hurt, she learned to stretch them and rest them properly. When she got stuck on a difficult passage, she broke it down into tiny pieces and practiced each one 100 times. When she felt like giving up, she reminded herself why she started. She thought about her parents working 16 hours a day so she could have lessons. She thought about Mrs. Harrington ignoring her and Jessica laughing at her. She thought about all the people who looked at her and saw nothing, and then she would take a deep breath and start practicing again. No one at the academy had any idea what Mei Lin could really do when she went to her lessons. She played exactly what was expected of her. She played the simple beginner pieces that Mrs. Harrington assigned. She never showed off, and she never tried to impress anyone. Part of her was afraid of what would happen if they found out. What if she played her best and they still said she was not good enough? What if they laughed at her for thinking she could play Chopin and Liszt? What if Mrs. Harrington told her she had no right to play such difficult music? So Mei Lin kept her secret hidden. She wore her invisibility like a suit of armor at the academy. She was the quiet girl in the back row who could barely play. Mary had a little lamb butt in the storage room of her parents' laundry shop. She was someone else entirely. She was a pianist who could make a broken piano sing like a concert grand. She was an artist who poured her whole soul into every note. She was Mei Lin Chen, and she was extraordinary. That The only person who knew the truth was her mother. Sometimes, late at night, her mother would open the storage room door and stand there listening. She did not understand classical music. She could not tell the difference between Chopin and Mozart, but she could hear something beautiful in her daughter's playing. She could hear passion and pain and hope, all woven together, and sometimes when Maylin played something especially moving, her mother would wipe tears from her eyes. On those nights, her mother would wait until Maylin finished. Then she would walk over and put her hands on her daughter's shoulders. She would not say anything because there was nothing that needed to be said. They both knew that something special was happening in this small room. They both knew that Maylin's gift could not stay hidden forever, but for now they kept the secret between them. For now they waited and watched and wondered what the future would bring. The broken piano in the storage room had become a portal to another world. Every night, Maylin stepped through that portal and left her difficult life behind. She forgot about Mrs. Harrington and Jessica and all the people who underestimated her. She forgot about her worn-out clothes and her family's struggles. All that existed was the music and the feeling of keys beneath her fingers. That was where Maylin found her strengths. That was where she discovered who she really wasn't. That was where she prepared for the moment when she would finally show the world what she could do. Spring arrived in the town of Westbrook with blooming flowers and warm sunshine. The trees along Main Street burst into pink and white blossoms. Birds sang in the morning and children played in the parks after school. But for the students at Westbrook Music Academy, spring meant only one thing: the annual spring recital was coming. This was the biggest event of the year at the academy. It had been a tradition for over 50 years, going all the way back to when the school first opened. Every student was expected to perform a piece on stage in front of a large audience. Parents and grandparents and friends would fill the auditorium to watch. Local newspapers would send reporters to cover the event, and, most importantly, talent scouts from prestigious music conservatories would attend. These scouts traveled from famous schools all over the country. They came to find the next generation of great musicians. A good performance at the Westbrook recital could change a young person's entire life. It could to lead to scholarships and opportunities that most people only dreamed about. Mrs. Harrington took the recital very seriously. She believed it was her job to showcase the best talent the academy had to offer. She also believed it was her job to protect the academy's reputation. That meant making sure every student performed at exactly the right level. She did not want any embarrassing failures on stage. She did not want any student attempting something beyond their abilities. So every spring she would personally assign each student their piece for the recital. She would evaluate their skills and their potential and their dedication. Then she would choose a piece that matched what she thought they could handle. The best students got the best piece. Students from wealthy families who took private lessons and practiced on expensive pianos got the most challenging and impressive music. They would play Beethoven sonatas and Bach fugues and Chopin etudes. These were the pieces that made the conservatory scouts sit up and pay attention. These were the pieces that could launch a career. The average students got average pieces: Mozart minuets and Clementi sonatinas and other intermediate works. Nothing too difficult and nothing too easy, just good solid performances that would make their parents proud. And then there were the students at the bottom, the ones Mrs. Harrington had decided were not worth much attention, the ones who she believed would never amount to anything special. For these students, she assigned the simplest pieces possible, beginner songs that young children learned in their first year of lessons. It was her way of telling them and everyone else that they did not belong with the real musicians. Maylin knew exactly where she stood in Mrs. Harrington's eyes. She had known it from her very first day at the academy. When Mrs. Harrington called a special meeting to announce the recital pieces, Maylin felt her stomach tighten with dread. The students gathered in the main hall on a Tuesday afternoon. They sat in rows of chairs facing a small stage where Mrs. Harrington stood with a clipboard in her hands. The room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone waited to hear what they would be playing. Mrs. Harrington cleared her throat and the room went silent. She began calling out names in alphabetical order. Each student walked up to receive their assigned sheet music. Some students grinned with excitement when they saw their pieces. Others looked worried or disappointed. Price practically skipped back to her seat after receiving a Beethoven sonata. She waved the sheet music around so everyone could see either. Friends gathered around her, cooing with admiration. Maylin watched all of this from her seat in the back row. Her last name was Chen, so she was called early in the process. When she heard her name, she stood up slowly and walked to the front. We could feel the eyes of the other students on her back. Some of them whispered to each other as she passed me. Harrington looked at Maylin with that familiar expression of mild boredom. She flipped through the papers on her clipboard until she found what she was looking for. Then she pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it out. Maylin took the paper and looked at Either heart sank to her feet. The title at the top read, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." It was the simplest piano piece in existence. It was a song that most students learned in their very first lesson when they were 5 or 6 years old, who had only 5 notes, and the rhythm was so basic that a toddler could clap along to it. Maylin stood there frozen, staring at the paper in her hand. She could not believe what she was seeing. Even for Mrs. Harrington, this seemed unnecessarily cruel. Behind her, someone laughed. It was Jessica Price, of course. Her high, sharp laugh cut through the silence of the room. Soon other students were laughing too. They tried to hide it behind their hands, but Maylin could hear them clearly. Mrs. Harrington seemed not to notice the laughter, or perhaps she simply did not care. She looked at Mei Lin with something that might have been a smile on her thin lips. "This should be manageable for you, dear," she said. Her voice was sweet on the surface, but there was something cold underneath. "We want to make sure everyone has a successful performance." Mei Lin wanted to say something. She wanted to protest or argue or demand a different piece, but the words stuck in her throat like stones. She could feel tears burning behind her eyes. She would not let them see her cry. She would never give them that satisfaction. So she nodded silently and turned to walk back to her seat. The walk felt like it took 100 years. Each step was heavy and slow. The whispers and giggles followed her like shadows. When she finally sat down, she kept her eyes fixed on the floor. She folded the sheet music and put it in her bag without looking at it again. She just wanted the meeting to end so she could escape after. All the names were called. Mrs. Harrington gave a speech about the importance of practice and dedication. She reminded everyone that the conservatory scouts would be watching carefully. She told them that this recital could be the most important performance of their young lives. Mei Lin barely heard any of either. Mind was somewhere else entirely. She was thinking about all the hours she had spent in the storage room. She was thinking about Chopin and Liszt and Rachmaninoff. She was thinking about the music that lived inside her, that no one here had ever heard. She was thinking about her parents who worked so hard to pay for these lessons. What would she tell them? How could she explain that after all their sacrifice? She would be playing a nursery rhyme on stage when the meeting finally ended. Mei Lin was the first one out the door. She walked quickly down the hallway with her head down. She did not want to talk to anyone. She did not want to see the pity or the mockery in their eyes, but Jessica caught up with her before she could reach the exit. "Hey, Mei Lin," Jessica called out in a fake friendly voice. Her group of friends followed behind her, giggling. Mei Lin stopped but did not turn around. Jessica walked around to face her with a big smile on her face. "I just wanted to say that I think it's really brave of you to perform at the recital." Her friends laughed at this. "Maybe you can play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star as an encore," Jessica continued, "or maybe Hot Cross Buns if you're feeling really ambitious." The girls erupted in laughter. Mei Lin looked at Jessica without expression. She did not give her the reaction she wanted. "I think it's actually sweet," Jessica said when the laughter died down. "I mean, not everyone can be a real pianist, right? Some people are just meant to do other things, like maybe working in a laundry shop or something." She said the last part with an innocent look on her face, as if she was just making a helpful suggestion. Her friends covered their mouths, trying not to laugh too loudly. Mei Lin felt that familiar burning feeling in her chest. The anger and sadness and hunger all mixed together, but she did not let it show on her face. She just looked at Jessica for a long moment, then she turned and walked away without saying a single word. Behind her, she could hear Jessica calling out more insults, but Mei Lin did not look back. She pushed through the front doors and stepped out into the spring sunshine, and the fresh air hit her face and she took a deep breath. She had 6 weeks until the recital, 6 weeks to decide what she was going to do. She started walking toward her parents' laundry shop. With each step her mind grew clearer. The burning feeling in her chest was still there, but now it was starting to change into something else, something that felt almost like determination. By the time she reached the shop, she had made a decision. She would not let them see her cry. She would not let them break her spirit, and she would not let Mrs. Harrington and Jessica Price have the last word. Mei Lin Chen was going to do something that no one expected. She did not know exactly what yet, but she knew that in 6 weeks everything was going to change. That night, Mei Lin sat at the broken piano in the storage room, but she did not play. She just sat there with her hands in her lap, staring at the keys. The single sheet of music lay on top of the piano where she had thrown it. Mary had a little lamp. Notes: a song for babies. Mei Lin could not stop thinking about the way everyone had laughed. She could not stop hearing Jessica's cruel words echoing in her head. She could not stop seeing Mrs. Harrington's cold smile as she handed over the sheet music. Her life, Mei Lin had tried to stay invisible. She had kept her head down and her mouth shut. She had accepted being ignored and overlooked and underestimated. She had told herself that it did not matter what other people thought. She had told herself that one day things would be different, but tonight, something inside her finally broke. The tears she had been holding back all afternoon came flooding out. She put her head down on the piano keys and sobbed. The piano made a terrible jangling noise as her tears fell on the ivory, but Mei Lin did not care. She cried for all the times she had been treated like she was nothing. She cried for all the hours she had spent practicing alone in the dark. She cried for her parents who worked so hard and sacrificed so much. She cried for the little girl who had believed that talent and hard work would be enough. She cried until there were no tears left. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were red and swollen. Her chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside. She looked at the sheet music for Mary Had a Little Lamb, such a simple, innocent little song in the hands of Mrs. Harrington. It had become a weapon. It was not just an assignment, it was a message. The message was clear: you do not belong here, you will never belong here, you are not one of us, and you never will be. Mei Lin picked up the sheet music and crumpled it into a ball. She threw it across the room as hard as she could. It bounced off a stack of towels and rolled under a shelf. She did not care if she ever saw it again for a long time. She sat in the darkness of the storage room. The only light came from a small window near the ceiling. Through it, she could see a few stars in the night sky. She thought about quitting. She could tell her parents she did not want to take lessons anymore. She could stop going to the academy and never see Mrs. Harrington or Jessica again. She could give up on music and focus on school. Maybe Jessica was right. Maybe people like her were not meant to be pianists. Maybe she should just accept her place in the world and stop dreaming about something more. But even as she thought these things, something inside her resisted. A small voice in her heart said no. It was the same voice that had kept her practicing night after night, the same voice that had pushed her to learn Chopin and Liszt on a broken piano, the same voice that whispered to her that she was capable of extraordinary things. That voice would not let her give up, not yet, not like this. Mei Lin did not hear her mother come in. She was so lost in her thoughts that she jumped when she felt a hand on her shoulder. Her mother stood beside her with a cup of tea in her other hand. Her face was lined with worry. She had heard the crying from the front of the shop. What happened? Her mother asked in Chinese. Her voice was soft and gentle. Mei Lin took the tea and wrapped her cold hands around the warm cup. She did not know how to explain everything. Her mother's English was not very good, and there were no Chinese words for the specific kind of cruelty that rich children could inflict. So she just showed her mother the crumpled ball of sheet music. Her mother smoothed it out and looked at it. She could not read the English words, but she recognized the simple melody. She had heard it many times on children's television programs. This is what they want you to play, her mother asked. Mei Lin nodded. At the big concert, Mei Lin nodded again. Her mother was quiet for a moment. She looked at the sheet music and then at her daughter. She had seen Mei Lin play Chopin nocturnes that made grown men weep. She watched her daughter masterpieces that professional pianists struggled with, and now they wanted her to play a nursery rhyme. Mother sat down on an overturned bucket next to the piano. She took her daughter's hand in both of hers. Do you remember what your grandmother used to say? She asked. Mei Lin shook her head. She had never met her grandmother, who had died in China before Mei Lin was born. She used to say that the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that breaks. Mei Lin did not understand what this had to do with anything. Her mother continued for a long time. I thought she meant we should be flexible and accept whatever comes, but now I think she meant something different. I think she meant that we should be patient and wait for the right moment. The bamboo bends in the storm, but when the storm passes, it stands up again, and when it stands up, it is still bamboo. It has not changed what it is. It has not become something else just because the wind tried to push it down. Her mother squeezed her hand. These people at your school, they are like the wind. They try to push you down and make you small. They want you to believe that you are nothing, but you are not nothing. Mei Lin, you are bamboo. You can bend, but you do not have to break. And when the time is right, you will stand up and show them who you are. Mei Lin felt fresh tears forming in her eyes, but these were different tears. These were not tears of despair, but tears of something else, something that felt like hope. Her mother reached up and wiped the tears from her daughter's cheeks. They see what you show them, she said, so show them who you are. Those words hit Mei Lin like a bolt of lightning. They see what you show them all. This time she had been hiding. She had been keeping her real abilities secret because she was afraid of being rejected, afraid of being laughed at, afraid of failing in front of everyone. But what if she stopped hiding? What if she stopped being afraid? What if she showed them exactly who she was and what she could do? The burning feeling in her chest came back, but now it was not just anger and sadness. Now it was something more. It was fire. It was determination. It was the will to fight. Mei Lin looked at her mother and saw the strength in her eyes. This woman had left everything she knew to come to a strange country. She had worked 16 hours a day for years just to survive. She had faced prejudice and hardship and struggled without ever giving up. If her mother could be that strong, then so could she. Mama, Mei Lin said quietly. I know what I am going to do. Her mother waited. They want me to play Mary Had a Little Lamb, and I will play it. But first I am going to play something else, something that will make them understand that they were wrong about me, something that will show them who I really am. Her mother smiled. It was a small smile, but it was full of pride. What will you play? She asked. Mei Lin thought for a moment. She needed something spectacular, something that would shock everyone in that auditorium, something that even Mrs. Harrington could not ignore him. Then she knew Campanella by Franz Liszt. She said her mother did not know this piece. She did not know that it was considered one of the most difficult piano compositions ever written. She did not know that professional pianists sometimes practiced for years before attempting it. She did not know that the technical demands were so extreme that some people believed it was impossible to play perfectly, but she could see the determination in her daughter's eyes, and that was enough for her. Then you will play a Campanella, her mother said, and I will be there to watch. And when you finish, I will be the first one to stand and clap. Mei Lin hugged her mother tight. For the first time since that terrible meeting at the academy, she felt like herself again. She felt like the girl who had taught herself Chopin on a broken piano. She felt like someone who could do impossible things. The recital was 6 weeks away, 6 weeks to prepare the performance of her life, 6 weeks to practice in secret, 6 weeks to get ready for the moment when everything would change. Mei Lin let go of her mother and turned to face the piano. She placed her hands on the keys and she began to play the opening notes of La Campanella. The bell-like melody filled the small storage room. Her mother stood in the doorway listening outside. The night was dark and quiet, but inside this little room a revolution was beginning. Mei Lin had finally decided to stop hiding it. Nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning Mei Lin woke up before dawn. She had slept only a few hours, but she felt more awake than she had in years. There was a new energy running through her body like electricity. She had a plan now, and that plan gave her purpose. She got dressed in the dark and crept out of the small apartment above the laundry shop. The streets were empty and quiet. At this hour she walked to the storage room and sat down at her broken piano. She had exactly 6 weeks to prepare La Campanella for performance. 6 weeks to master a piece that professional pianists spent years perfecting. 6 weeks to accomplish the impossible. But Mei Lin was not afraid. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life, even if she did not know it. Those nights practicing alone in the dark had built something inside her, something strong and unbreakable, something that was ready to be unleashed. La Campanella was written by Franz Liszt in 1851. The name means the little bell in Italian. It was inspired by a famous violin piece by Paganini. Liszt heard the piece and was so moved that he created his own version for piano. But Liszt did not simply copy the music, he transformed it into something extraordinary. He pushed the piano to its absolute limits. He created passages that seemed physically impossible to play. He demanded speed and precision and power that tested even the greatest pianists in the world. The piece is famous for its bell-like melody in the high register. The right hand has to jump huge distances across the keyboard. Sometimes the jumps are more than 2 octaves in a fraction of a second. One wrong move and the entire passage falls apart. The left hand, meanwhile, plays complex accompaniment patterns. Both hands have to work together in perfect coordination. The speed is almost inhuman. Some sections require the fingers to move so fast that they become a blur. Mei Lin had listened to recordings of La Campanella hundreds of times. She had studied the way different pianists approached it. She had even tried to play parts of it before on her broken piano, but she had never attempted to learn the entire piece from start to finish. Now she had no choice. She pulled out a worn notebook where she had written down the music by ear. She had no official sheet music for Liszt. The Academy only gave her beginner materials, so she had done what she always did. She listened and she memorized and she wrote everything down by hand. Her notebook was filled with pages of music notations. Some of it was messy and hard to read, some of it had been crossed out and rewritten multiple times, but it was accurate. She had checked it against recordings over and over again. Now she opened the notebook to the first page and began the opening of La Campanella. Starts quietly. Simple melody played high on the keyboard. It sounds almost easy at first, but Mei Lin knew that this was just the calm before the storm. She played the opening phrase slowly and carefully. Her fingers found the notes on the broken piano. Even with 3 keys missing, she could make it work. She had learned to adjust and adapt. She had learned to hear the music in her head, even when the piano could not produce it. After the opening, the piece gradually builds in complexity. The jumps get bigger, the speed increases, the hands have to work harder and harder. Mei Lin practiced each section separately. At first she broke the music down into tiny pieces. She would play for measures over and over until they were perfect. Then she would move to the next 4 measures. Then she would put them together. It was slow, painful work. Her hands cramped after the first hour. Her shoulders ached after the second, but she did not stop. She thought about Mrs. Harrington's cold smile. She thought about Jessica's cruel laughter. She thought about all the people who had looked at her and seen nothing. Every time she wanted to rest, those memories pushed her forward. The hardest part of La Campanella comes in the middle section. There is a passage where the right hand has to play a rapid series of notes while jumping constantly. The jumps are so big that most pianists cannot make them accurately every time. Even professionals miss notes during this section. It is simply the nature of the piece, but Mei Lin wanted to be perfect. Did not want to give anyone a reason to dismiss her performance. She did not want Mrs. Harrington to be able to say she was sloppy or unprepared, so she practiced the jumping section more than anything else. She practiced it 50 times in a row. Then she practiced it 50 more times. Her right arm burned with exhaustion. Her fingers felt like they might fall off, but slowly, impossibly, she started to get it right. Not every time, but more often than not. By the end of the first week, Mei Lin had memorized the entire piece. She could play it from start to finish without looking at her notebook. It was far from perfect. She made mistakes constantly. Her timing was uneven in places. Some of the fast passages came out muddy and unclear. But she had the skeleton of the performance now. She just needed to add the muscle and the skin every day for the next 5 weeks. Mei Lin followed the same routine. As she went to school in the morning and pretended to be a normal student, she went to her piano lessons at the academy and played her simple beginner pieces. She never gave any hint of what she was really working on. Mrs. Harrington continued to ignore her. Jessica continued to make snide comments. Mei Lin let it all wash over her like water off a stone. In the evenings, she helped at the laundry shop. She folded clothes and sorted laundry and did her homework. She ate dinner with her parents and listened to her father's stories about the old country. And then at 10 o'clock, when the shop closed, she went to the storage room. That was when the real work began. She practiced from 10 at night until 2 in the morning for hours of intense focused work. She recorded herself on an old cassette player and listened back. She identified every mistake, every hesitation, every moment of weakness. Then she fixed them one by one. Her mother brought her tea and sometimes sat with her. Her father poked his head in occasionally and gave her a thumbs up. They did not fully understand what she was doing, but they knew it was important to her. Hand that was enough. As the weeks passed, Mei Lin felt herself changing. Her fingers grew stronger and more precise. Her hands stretched further across the keys. Her mind became sharper and more focused. But more than that, something changed. Inside her heart, she started to believe in herself, not just hope that she might be good, but actually believed that she was capable of something extraordinary. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. All her life she had doubted herself, she had accepted other people's low expectations of her, she had hidden her gifts because she was afraid of being rejected, but now that fear was fading, in its place was something new: confidence, real, honest confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you have worked harder than anyone, the kind that comes from facing the impossible and refusing to back down, the kind that comes from finally accepting who you really are. By the fifth week, Mei Lin could play La Campanella almost perfectly. Not every run was flawed, every jump landed exactly where it should, but the piece was alive. It breathed and sang and danced under her fingers when she played it. She forgot about everything else. She forgot about the broken piano and the cramped storage room. She forgot about Mrs. Harrington and Jessica and all the people who had heard her. She became the music hand. The music became her, and the night before the dress rehearsal, Mei Lin sat at her piano one last time. She was exhausted. Her body ached from weeks of intense practice. Mind was tired from balancing school and work and her secret preparation, but she felt ready. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. Took a deep breath and she played La Campanella one final time. The music filled the storage room like sunlight. The bell melody rang out clear and true. Her hands flew across the keyboard with speed and precision. Every note was exactly where it belonged. Every phrase told part of the story. When she finished the last chord, she opened her eyes. Her mother was standing in the doorway with tears on her cheeks. Her father stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder. They had been listening the whole time. No one said anything. There was nothing to say. They all knew that tomorrow everything was going to change. Mei Lin looked at her broken piano with its missing keys and cracked wood. It had been her teacher and her friend for 3 years. It had helped her become who she was. She placed her hand on the top of it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she stood up and walked past her parents to her room. She needed to sleep. Tomorrow was the dress rehearsal, and the day after that was the recital. On the day when Mei Lin Chen would finally show the world who she really was. The dress rehearsal was held on a gray Thursday afternoon. Clouds hung low over the town of Westbrook, blocking out the sun inside the Academy auditorium. The students gathered nervously. They sat in rows of velvet seats, whispering to each other about their pieces. Some looked confident, while others looked terrified. Mrs. Harrington stood at the front of the room with her clipboard. She wore a dark blue dress, and her pearl earrings clicked as she moved her head. Her eyes scanned the room, counting heads and making notes. This was her kingdom, and she ruled it with absolute authority. Mei Lin sat in the back row. As always, she had arrived early and chosen a seat in the corner where no one would notice her. She wore her usual clothes and carried her usual bag. Nothing about her appearance suggested that anything had changed. But inside she was different. Inside she was a volcano waiting to erupt. The rehearsal followed the same order as the actual recital. Wood students were called one by one to perform their pieces. Mrs. Harrington sat in the front row, taking notes on each performance. She would stop students mid-piece if they made too many mistakes. She would offer corrections and criticisms in her sharp, cold voice. She would remind them that the conservatory scouts would be watching tomorrow. The pressure in the room was intense. Several students broke down crying after their performances. One boy forgot his entire piece halfway through and had to start over 3 times. A girl from Jessica's friend group played so badly that Mrs. Harrington told her to practice all night or risk embarrassing the academy. Even Jessica seemed nervous when her turn came. She walked to the grand piano with her head held high. She sat down and adjusted the bench with careful precision. Then she played her Beethoven sonata. It was technically correct. Every note was in the right place at the right time. Her fingers moved with practiced efficiency, but there was something missing. The music sounded empty. Somehow it was like watching a robot play piano, perfect but lifeless. Mrs. Harrington did not seem to notice. She praised Jessica warmly and told her she was sure to impress the scouts. Jessica smiled her perfect smile and returned to her seat. Her friends gathered around her whispering, "Congratulations." She glanced over at Mei Lin with a smug expression. Mei Lin did not react. She just waited. Finally, after 2 hours of performances, Mrs. Harrington called Mei Lin's name. It was the last name on the list. Mei Lin stood up and walked down the aisle toward the stage. She could feel everyone watching her. Some students whispered and giggled. They were expecting entertainment. They were expecting to watch the poor immigrant girl stumble through a nursery rhyme. Mei Lin climbed the steps to the stage and walked to the grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway concert grand, worth more than her parents made in 10 years. She had never played on anything like it before. Her broken piano in the storage room was nothing compared to this. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it to the right height. She placed her hands on the keys and felt the smooth ivory beneath her fingers. The piano was perfectly tuned. Every key responded with beautiful clarity. For a moment she just sat there feeling the instrument. Then she took a deep breath and began to play. Mary Had a Little Lamb. The simple melody filled the auditorium. It sounded exactly as Mrs. Harrington expected, simple and basic and forgettable. Mei Lin played it with careful precision. She did not add any flourishes or variations. She just played the notes as written. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then a few students laughed quietly. Mrs. Harrington nodded and made a note on her clipboard. "That was fine, dear," she said in her flat-board voice. "Just try not to be nervous tomorrow. Remember to smile at the audience before you begin." Mei Lin nodded and stood up from the bench. She walked back down the aisle to a seat. No one looked at her. No one cared. She was invisible again, just as she had always been. The rehearsal ended, and students began gathering their things. Parents arrived to pick up their children. The auditorium slowly emptied. Mei Lin waited until almost everyone was gone. Then she slipped out a side door and walked to her parents' laundry shop. The evening passed slowly. Mei Lin helped with the laundry and did her homework. She ate dinner with her parents without saying much. Her mother watched her with concerned eyes. Her father told jokes trying to make her smile, but Mei Lin was somewhere else in her mind. She was thinking about tomorrow. She was thinking about the moment when she would walk onto that stage. She was thinking about what she was about to do after dinner. Her mother came to find her in the storage room. Mei Lin was sitting at the broken piano, but she was not playing. She was just sitting there with her hands in her lap. "Are you scared?" her mother asked. Mei Lin thought about the question. "No," she said finally, "I am not scared. I know what I can do. I have worked harder than anyone. I have practiced more than anyone. I am ready." Her mother sat down beside her. "Then why do you look so worried?" Mei Lin was quiet for a long moment. "What if it does not matter?" she said. "What if I play perfectly and they still do not see me? What if I give everything I have and they still think I am nothing?" Her mother took her hand. "Do you remember what I told you about the bamboo?" Mei Lin nodded. "The bamboo does not bend to make others happy," her mother said. "It bends to survive the storm. And when it stands up again, it does not care if anyone is watching. It stands up because that is what bamboo does. Tomorrow you will play because that is what you do. You will play because when the music is inside you and it needs to come out, what happens after that is not in your control. But the playing itself belongs to you. No one can take that away." Mei Lin felt something loosen in her chest. Her mother was right. She had been thinking about this all wrong. She had been focused on proving something to Mrs. Harrington and Jessica. She had been focused on changing other people's opinions, but that was not why she played piano. She played because the music made her feel alive. She played because it was the truest expression of who she was. She played because she could not imagine not playing tomorrow. She would share that gift with the world. What they did with it was up to them, but the gift itself was hers to give. "Thank you, Mama," Mei Lin said. Her mother smiled and kissed her forehead. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow is a big day." Mei Lin went to bed, but she did not sleep much. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the city outside. Cars passed on the street below. Dog barked somewhere in the distance. The old building creaked and settled around her. She thought about her grandmother, who she had never met. She wondered if her grandmother had ever felt this way, nervous and excited and scared and ready all at the same time. She thought about her parents sleeping in the next room. They would be there tomorrow in the audience. They would be watching when she walked onto that stage. They would be the first to know what she was about to do. Finally, as the first light of dawn appeared in the window, Mei Lin fell asleep. She dreamed of a concert hall filled with thousands of people. She dreamed of walking to a grand piano under bright lights. She dreamed of playing La Campanella and hearing the audience gasp. She dreamed of standing up and taking a bow while everyone applauded, and in her dream she was not scared at all. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was born to do. The day of the recital arrived with perfect spring weather. The clouds from the day before had disappeared. Bright sunshine poured down on the town of Westbrook. Birds sang in the trees along Main Street. Flowers bloomed in window boxes and garden beds. It was the kind of day that made people smile for no reason. But Mei Lin was not thinking about the weather. She was thinking about what would happen in just a few hours. She woke up early and took a long shower. She let the hot water run over her shoulders and back. She closed her eyes and ran through La Campanella in her mind. Every note was clear and sharp in her memory. Her fingers twitched slightly as she imagined playing. After her shower, she found a dress laid out on her bed. It was new. She had never seen it before. The fabric was a deep red color, like Chinese silk. It was simple but elegant, with delicate embroidery along the sleeves. Small notes sat on top of it, written in her mother's handwriting: "For my daughter." The pianist. Mei Lin held the dress up and felt tears forming in her eyes. Her mother must have been working on it for weeks. She must have sewn it late at night after Mei Lin went to bed. All those times Mei Lin thought her mother was just doing laundry. She was actually creating this gift. Mei Lin put on the dress and looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. She barely recognized the girl looking back at her. The dress fit perfectly. The red color made her skin glow. For the first time in her life, she looked like someone who belonged on a stage. Her mother appeared in the doorway and smiled. "Beautiful," she said simply. Her father came up behind her mother and nodded his approval. "You look like a real musician," he said in his accented English. "Today you show them who you are." The family ate breakfast together in unusual silence. There was too much to say, so they said nothing. They just sat and ate and looked at each other with love in their eyes. After breakfast, they walked together to the academy. It was only a mile, but they walked slowly. Mei Lin's father held her mother's hand. Her mother held Mei Lin's hand. They were a chain of three people connected by love and hope. The academy auditorium was already filling up when they arrived. Parents and grandparents and friends streamed through the front doors. They carried flowers and cameras and programs with the students' names printed inside. Local reporters set up equipment. Near the back of the room, a photographer from the newspaper positioned himself near the stage, and in the front row, three people sat with clipboards and serious expressions. The conservatory scouts. Mei Lin recognized them from descriptions she had heard. One was from the New England Conservatory in Boston. One was from the Juilliard School in New York City. One was from the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia. These were the most prestigious music schools in the country. A recommendation from any of them could change a young musician's entire life. Mei Lin's parents found seats in the middle of the auditorium. They were surrounded by wealthy families in expensive clothes. Her father's work shirt and her mother's simple dress stood out, but they sat with their heads held high. They were there to see their daughter perform. Nothing else mattered. Mei Lin went backstage where the other students were gathering. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Students paced back and forth, muttering to themselves. Some did stretching exercises for their hands and fingers. Others sat quietly with their eyes closed, trying to stay calm. Jessica stood in the corner, surrounded by her friends. She wore a beautiful white dress that probably cost more than Mei Lin's family earned in a month. Her hair was professionally styled and her makeup was perfect. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. When she saw Mei Lin, she whispered something to her friends. They all turned to look and giggled. Jessica walked over with a sweet smile on her face. "Oh, Mei Lin, what a pretty dress," she said. Her voice dripped with fake sincerity. "Did your mother make it herself?" Mei Lin looked at Jessica calmly. "Yes, she did. She is very talented." Jessica's smile flickered for just a moment. She had expected Mei Lin to be embarrassed. Instead, she seemed almost proud. "Well," Jessica said, recovering quickly, "I am sure you will do great today." "Mary Had a Little Lamb" is such a classic. Her friends laughed at this. Mei Lin just smiled. "Thank you, Jessica. Good luck with your Beethoven." She turned and walked away, leaving Jessica confused. That was not the reaction she had expected at all. Mrs. Harrington appeared backstage and clapped her hands for attention. "Everyone listen carefully," she announced. "The recital will begin in 15 minutes. You will perform in the same order as yesterday. When your name is called, walk calmly to the stage, bow to the audience before you sit down. When you finish, bow again and return backstage. Remember that the conservatory scouts are watching. This is your chance to make a good impression. Do not waste it." She looked around the room, making eye contact with certain students, the students from wealthy families, the students she considered talented, the students she had invested her time and attention in. Her eyes passed over Mei Lin without stopping. Mei Lin did not exist in Mrs. Harrington's world. She was just a name at the bottom of a list, a formality to get through before the recital could end. The students filed out to take their seats in the reserved section near the stage. Mei Lin sat at the end of a row by herself. She folded her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead. Her heart was beating fast, but her breathing was steady. She had never felt so calm and so terrified at the same time. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the grand piano on stage. Mrs. Harrington walked out and stood behind a microphone. She welcomed everyone to the 53rd annual spring recital. She thanked the parents and families for their support. She introduced the conservatory scouts by name. She talked about the academy's proud tradition of excellence. She talked for what seemed like forever. Finally, she announced the first performer. A boy named Andrew walked nervously to the piano. He played a Mozart piece with shaking hands. He made several mistakes but finished without disaster. The audience applauded politely. One by one, the students performed. Some played beautifully and received enthusiastic applause. Others struggled and received polite sympathy claps. The conservatory scouts made notes on their clipboard. She whispered to each other and nodded or shook their heads. Jessica's performance came about halfway through. She walked to the piano like a queen approaching her throne. She sat down and played her Beethoven sonata. It was exactly like yesterday, technically perfect but emotionally empty. The audience applauded loudly anyway. The scouts made notes, but their expressions gave nothing away. Jessica returned to her seat with a satisfied smile. She was confident that she had impressed everyone who met at the recital. Continued. Student after student took the stage. The afternoon stretched on. Finally, there was only one name left on the list. Mrs. Harrington looked at her program. "And our final performer today is Mei Lin Chen," she said, the name without enthusiasm. "Mei Lin will be playing Mary Had a Little Lamb." Few people in the audience chuckled. The conservatory scouts looked surprised. One of them leaned over and whispered to another. This was clearly not what they had expected from a recital finale. Mei Lin stood up from her seat. She smoothed the front of her red dress sheet, took a deep breath and began walking toward the stage. The spotlight was warm on her face. The grand piano gleamed under the lights. 200 people watched her climb the steps. Among them, her parents sat holding hands with tears already forming in their eyes. This was the moment. This was what everything had been building toward. Mei Lin walked to the center of the stage and stopped. She turned to face the audience. She found her parents in the crowd and looked directly at them. Then she bowed low and graceful. When she stood up again, there was something different in her eyes, something that had not been there before, something that made a few people in the audience sit up straighter in their seats. Mei Lin turned and walked to the grand piano. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it carefully. She placed her hands on the keys. The auditorium fell completely silent. Everyone waited for the simple nursery rhyme to begin, but Mei Lin did not play Mary Had a Little Lamb. Instead, she closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them again, everything changed. Mei Lin's fingers came down on the keys and the first notes of La Campanella rang out through the auditorium. The sound was like nothing anyone expected. It was not the simple plinking of a nursery rhyme. It was a cascade of bell-like tones falling from the highest register of the piano, pure and crystalline and impossibly beautiful. For a moment, the audience did not understand what they were hearing. Several people looked at their programs in confusion. Mrs. Harrington's mouth fell open. Her clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. She knew this piece. Every serious piano teacher knew this piece. It was listed. Was La Campanella. It was one of the most difficult compositions ever written for piano, and this girl, this invisible girl in the back row, was playing it. The opening melody floated through the air like magic. Mei Lin's right hand danced across the keys with perfect precision. Each note rang out clear and bright, like a tiny silver bell. Her left hand provided a gentle accompaniment underneath. The music was delicate at first, almost fragile, but there was something underneath that delicacy, a hint of the power that was building, a promise of what was to come. In the audience, people began to whisper, "What is happening? Who is this girl? Is this really the same student who was assigned?" Mary had a little lamb. The conservatory scouts leaned forward in their seats. Their clipboards were forgotten. Their pens hung motionless in their hands. They could not take their eyes off the small figure at the piano. Mei Lin's parents sat frozen in their seats. They had heard their daughter play this piece before in the storage room, but hearing it on a broken piano in a cramped space was nothing like this. The grand Steinway brought out colors and textures they had never noticed. The acoustics of the auditorium made every note ring with stunning clarity. Tears streamed down her mother's face. Her father gripped her hand so tight his knuckles turned white. The piece began to build in intensity. The jumps grew larger and more frequent. Mei Lin's right hand leaped across 2 octaves in a heartbeat, then back again, then up again. Each landing was precise and perfect. A single note was missed. Not a single bell tone failed to ring. The tempo increased and the difficulty escalated. This was where most pianists began to struggle. This was where even professionals sometimes lost control. But Mei Lin was not struggling. She was flying. Her whole body moved with the music. Now she swayed on the bench as her hands flew across the keyboard. Her red dress caught the spotlight and seemed to glow. Her face was calm and focused, but there was joy in her eyes. Pure, unfiltered joy. This was what she was born to do. This was who she really was. In the reserved section, Jessica Price sat with her mouth hanging open. Her white dress and perfect hair meant nothing now. Her technically correct Beethoven sonata was forgotten. She was watching something she could not understand. She was watching the invisible girl become visible. She was watching the girl she had mocked transform into something extraordinary. The middle section of La Campanella arrived. This was the most demanding part of the entire piece. The right hand had to play rapid passages while making enormous leaps. The leaps were so large that most pianists could not make them accurately. Every time even the greatest performers in the world sometimes missed notes. Here Mei Lin did not miss a single one. Her hand flew up and down the keyboard like a hummingbird. The bell melody sang out above the rushing accompaniment. The speed was breathtaking. The precision was inhuman. Someone in the audience gasped out loud, then another person, then another. People were beginning to stand up from their seats. They could not help themselves. They had to get closer. They had to see this with their own eyes. Mrs. Harrington sat paralyzed in the front row. Her face had gone completely pale. She was watching her own judgment crumble before her eyes. She had dismissed this girl. She had ignored her for 2 years. She had given her Mary had a little lamb because she believed that was all she could handle, and now this same girl was playing Liszt, not just playing but mastering, not just mastering but transcending. Mrs. Harrington had been teaching piano for 40 years. She had seen thousands of students come and go. She had watched prodigies rise and fall. She thought she knew talent when she saw it, but she had been blind. She had looked at Mei Lin and seen nothing, and now that the whole world was seeing what she had missed, the piece moved into its final section. The music became even more intense. Mei Lin's fingers moved so fast they were a blur of motion. The piano seemed to be singing and crying and laughing all at once. Waves of sound crashed over the audience. Crescendos built and released and built again. It was overwhelming. It was beautiful beyond words. Mei Lin could feel the music flowing through her like electricity. She was not thinking about the notes anymore. She was not thinking about the technique. She was not thinking about Mrs. Harrington or Jessica or the conservatory scouts. It was simply being the music, being herself, being everything she had hidden for so long. The climax of the piece approached. The famous final run up the keyboard. Mei Lin's right hand began at the bottom and flew upward. Each note rang out like a step on a staircase to heaven. Higher and higher the melody climbed. The audience held their breath. Not a single person moved. Not a single sound disturbed the music. And then the final chord. Mei Lin brought both hands down on the keys with perfect force. The sound exploded through the auditorium and hung in the air. She held the chord for a long moment, letting it fade naturally. Then she slowly lifted her hands from the keyboard and placed them in her lap. Silence, complete and total silence, complete and total silence. No one made a sound. The audience was in shock. They had come expecting a children's recital. They had found something else entirely. They had witnessed something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Then a single person began to clap. It was Mei Lin's mother. She was standing in the middle of the auditorium with tears streaming down her face, clapping as hard as she could. Her father stood up beside her. Then another person stood. Then another and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet. The applause was thunderous, shook the walls and rattled the windows. People were cheering and shouting. Some were crying openly. The conservatory scouts had abandoned all pretense of professional distance. They were standing and applauding with everyone else. Mei Lin sat at the piano, taking it all, and the sound washed over her like a warm wave. She could see her parents in the crowd. Her mother was sobbing with joy. Her father was pumping his fist in the air. She could see Jessica staring at her with an expression of pure disbelief she could see. Mrs. Harrington frozen in her seat, unable to move. She had done it. She had shown them who she really was, but she was not finished yet. Mei Lin held up one hand and the audience slowly quieted. They sat back down, wondering what was happening. Was she going to speak? Was she going to play something else? Mei Lin turned back to the piano. She placed her hands on the keys and she began to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. The simple nursery rhyme filled the auditorium after the thunder of Liszt. It sounded almost comically simple, 5 notes, a melody that children learned in their first week of lessons. Mei Lin played it exactly as Mrs. Harrington had assigned, simple and basic and correct. When she finished, she turned to look at Mrs. Harrington. She did not smile, she did not smirk, she just looked at her with calm, steady eyes. The message was clear. I played what you asked. Are you satisfied? The audience erupted in laughter and even louder applause. They understood exactly what had just happened. They understood the statement Mei Lin had made. She had shown them her true abilities, and then she had shown them what the teacher thought she was capable of. That contrast was devastating. Mei Lin stood up from the bench. She walked to the center of the stage. She bowed low and graceful, and when she lifted her head she was smiling, a real smile of someone who had finally been seen. The moments after Mei Lin left the stage were chaos. People rushed toward her from every direction. Parents who had ignored her for 2 years suddenly wanted to shake her hand. Students who had laughed at her now looked at her with awe. Reporters pushed through the crowd shouting questions. Photographers snapped pictures from every angle. But the first people to reach her were the conservatory scouts. The woman from Juilliard got there first. She was tall, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She had been scouting young musicians for over 20 years. She had discovered some of the greatest pianists of the current generation, and she had never seen anything quite like what she had just witnessed. Young lady, she said breathlessly, that was extraordinary. Where did you study? Who is your teacher? Mei Lin looked at her calmly. I taught myself, she said, on a broken piano in my parents' laundry shop. The scout stared at her in disbelief. That is impossible. La Campanella requires years of professional training. The technique alone takes most students a decade to develop. Mei Lin shrugged. I practiced every night from 10 until 2 in the morning for 3 years. I listened to recordings and figured out the notes by ear. I wrote them down in a notebook, then I practiced until I got it right. The scout from Curtis Institute had joined them now. He was a short, round man with glasses and a kind face. Do you have any formal training at all? He asked. Mei Lin nodded. I take lessons here at the academy. Mrs. Harrington is my teacher. Both scouts turned to look at Mrs. Harrington. She was still sitting in the front row. She had not moved since the performance ended. Her face was the color of old paper. Her hands trembled in her lap. Mrs. Harrington assigned you Mary Had a Little Lamb. The Juilliard scout said it was not a question, it was an accusation. Mrs. Harrington opened her mouth, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? She had judged this girl based on her clothes and her family and her quiet demeanor. She had decided that Mei Lin had no talent without ever really listening to her play. She had dismissed her as worthless, and now the whole world knew she had been wrong. The scout from New England Conservatory pushed through the crowd. He was younger than the other two, with wild curly hair and an excited expression. I have to know, he said to Mei Lin. How did you learn to play with such emotion? The technique I can almost understand. With enough practice anyone can develop speed and accuracy, but the feeling in your playing, that cannot be taught. That has to come from somewhere. Mei Lin thought about the question. She thought about all the nights alone in the storage room. She thought about the tears she who had cried and the anger she had swallowed. She thought about being invisible and ignored and underestimated. She thought about her parents working 16 hours a day so she could have lessons. She thought about her mother's words on that dark night when everything changed. I played what I felt, she said simply. All the sadness and the hope and the wanting to be seen, I put it all into the music. It was the only place I could let it out. The 3 scouts looked at each other. They did not need to discuss what to do. They had all reached the same conclusion. Independently, the Juilliard scout spoke first. Mei Lin, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to the Juilliard school. Room and board and tuition completely covered. You would study with the finest piano faculty in the world. Before Mei Lin could respond, the Curtis scout stepped forward. The Curtis Institute would also like to offer you a full scholarship. We have a smaller program, which means more individual attention. You would have access to our historic collection of Steinway pianos. The New England Conservatory scout was not about to be left out. Our conservatory has the oldest piano program in the country. We would be honored to have you as a student. Full scholarship. Of course, Mei Lin stood there surrounded by offers that most young musicians only dreamed of. 3 of the most prestigious music schools in America wanted her. They were competing for her. They were treating her like she was something special because she had always been special. She had just needed to show them. The crowd around Mei Lin had grown even larger. Everyone wanted to talk to her. Everyone wanted to touch the girl who had just done the impossible. But Mei Lin was looking for someone specific. She scanned the faces until she found them. Her parents were standing at the edge of the crowd. They could not push through to reach her. They just stood there watching with tears on their faces. Mei Lin excused herself from the scouts and walked toward her parents. The crowd parted to let her through. When she reached them, she threw her arms around both of them. The 3 of them stood there hugging in the middle of the auditorium. No words were needed. They had all sacrificed so much to reach This moment, the early mornings and late nights, the skipped meals and worn-out clothes, the years of being looked down on and dismissed, all of it had been worth it. All of it had led to this when they finally let go of each other. Mei Lin saw someone approach. Was Mrs. Harrington. The crowd fell silent as she walked toward the Chen family. Her face was pale and her steps were unsteady. She looked like a woman walking to her own execution. She stopped in front of Mei Lin and stood there for a long moment. Whole auditorium watched and waited. "I owe you an apology," Mrs. Harrington said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I judged you unfairly. I assumed things about you that were not true. I let my prejudices blind me to your talent. I am deeply sorry." Mei Lin looked at the woman who had made her feel invisible for 2 years. She could have been cruel. She could have said something cutting and walked away. She could have made Mrs. Harrington feel as small as she had made Mei Lin feel, but that was not who Mei Lin was. "Thank you for the apology," Mei Lin said. "I hope you will look more carefully at your other students. There might be more of us than you think." Mrs. Harrington nodded slowly. There were tears in her eyes. "Now you are right," she said. "I have a lot to learn." She turned and walked away through the crowd. Her shoulders were slumped and her head was down. The reporters followed her shouting questions, but she did not answer any of them. The story spread quickly by that evening. It was in the local newspaper by the next morning. It was being picked up by national media. The headline everyone used was some version of the same thing. She was told to play a nursery rhyme, then she shocked everyone with a masterpiece television. Crews arrived in Westbrook to interview Mei Lin and her family. They filmed the small laundry shop where she had grown up. They filmed the storage room with its broken piano. They told the story of a girl who had been overlooked and underestimated. Girl who had taught herself to play the most difficult music in the world. Day girl who had waited patiently for the right moment to show who she really was. Mei Lin's story touched something deep in people. It was a story about talent and hard work, but it was also a story about judgment and prejudice. It was a story about all the invisible people who might be extraordinary if someone just gave them a chance. It made people think about who they might be overlooking. It made them wonder what gifts might be hiding in plain sight. And for Mei Lin, it was just the beginning. The best was still to come. 10 years passed after that spring recital in Westbrook. 10 years of growth and change in music. 10 years that transformed a shy girl from a laundry shop into one of the most celebrated pianists of her generation. Mei Lin chose to attend the Juilliard School in New York City. It was a difficult decision because all 3 conservatories had offered her amazing opportunities, but something about Juilliard felt right. It was the biggest stage in the biggest city and Mei Lin was ready to be seen. Her first year at Juilliard was overwhelming. She was surrounded by talented musicians from all over the world. Many of them had been training since they could walk. Many of them came from wealthy families with connections to the classical music industry. For a moment, Mei Lin wondered if she would become invisible again, but she was not the same girl she had been at Westbrook Academy. She had learned something important on that recital stage. She had learned that her voice deserved to be heard. She had learned that hiding her gifts did not protect her, it only hurt her. So she played with everything she had. She practiced harder than anyone else at the school. She took every opportunity to perform. She entered competitions and won them. She gave recitals that left audiences breathless. Word spread quickly through the classical music world. There was a young pianist at Juilliard who played with unusual fire. A girl who had taught herself Liszt on a broken piano. A girl whose story was as remarkable as her talent. By her 3rd year, Mei Lin was performing with major orchestras. By her 4th year, she was giving solo recitals in famous concert halls. By the time she graduated, she had a recording contract and a manager and a calendar full of performances around the world. But success did not change who Mei Lin was. At her core, she remained humble and hardworking. She never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the lessons she had learned in that cramped storage room. Every year, she returned to Westbrook to visit her parents. The laundry shop was still there, although it was doing much better. Now Mei Lin had insisted on paying off her parents' debts with her first big paycheck. She had bought them a small house near the shop. She had made sure they would never have to worry about money again, but they still worked at the laundry. They said it gave them purpose. They said their customers had become like family. Mei Lin understood some things were more important than comfort. In one of these visits about 5 years after the recital, Mei Lin stopped by the Westbrook Academy. She was not sure why. Maybe she wanted to see where it all began. Maybe she wanted to face the ghosts of her past. The building looked exactly the same. The high ceilings and wooden floors, the photographs on the walls, the grand pianos in every practice room. But Mrs. Harrington was gone. She had resigned 3 months after the recital. The story was that she had decided to retire early, but everyone knew the real reason she could not face her colleagues or her students. After what had happened, she could not live with the knowledge that she had so badly misjudged a child. New head instructor was a young woman named Ms. Torres. She had heard about Mei Lin. Of course, everyone in the music education world had heard about Mei Lin. When she saw the famous pianist walking through her academy, she nearly fainted. "Ms. Chen," she stammered, "this is such an honor. What brings you here?" Mei Lin smiled at her warmly. "I wanted to see a place where I gave my first real performance. And I wanted to ask you something. Do you have any students who might be struggling? Students who do not fit the usual mold? Students who might be overlooked?" Ms. Torres thought about the question. "We have a few," she admitted. "There is one boy in particular. His family cannot afford private lessons, the other students do not include him. But when I listen to him practice alone, I hear something special. Mei Lin nodded. I would like to meet him, and I would like to pay for his lessons, all of them, for as long as he wants to study. Ms. Torres stared at her in amazement. That is incredibly generous. But why? Mei Lin looked around. The academy. She remembered sitting in the back row feeling invisible. Remembered Mrs. Harrington's cold eyes passing over her. She remembered the sheet music for Mary Had a Little Lamb. Because someone should have done the same for me, she said, and because talent does not care about money or family background, it just that needs someone to believe in it. From that day on, Mei Lin established a scholarship fund in her name. It provided full tuition to music students from disadvantaged backgrounds. She personally reviewed applications and chose recipients. She met with each student and listened to them play. She looked for the spark that others might miss. The fund grew over the years. Donors from around the world contributed. Former recipients went on to successful careers and gave back themselves. It became one of the most respected music education programs in the country, and it all started because a girl in a red dress had the courage to show the world who she really was today. Mei Lin Chen is in her late 20s. She has performed in every major concert hall on earth. She has recorded albums that have won international prizes. She has been called a genius and a prodigy and a once-in-a-generation talent. But when reporters ask her about her success, she always tells the same story. She tells them about the broken piano in the storage room. She tells them about her parents working 16 hours a day. She tells them about Mrs. Harrington and Mary Had a Little Lamb. She tells them about her mother's words on that dark night. They see what you show them, so show them who you are. And she tells them about the recital, the day she stopped hiking, the day she let the world hear her voice, the day everything changed. In her studio apartment in New York City, Mei Lin keeps a few treasured possessions. There are photographs of her parents on the wall. There are programs from her most important performances. There are letters from students whose lives she has touched, and in the corner of the room sits an old broken piano with 3 missing keys. It is the same piano from the storage room. When her parents finally closed the laundry shop, they shipped it to her. It cost more to transport than the piano was worth, but Mei Lin did not care. That piano had been her first teacher. It had listened to her tears and her frustration, had witnessed her transformation from an invisible girl into an artist. It had held her secrets when no one else would. Sometimes, late at night when she cannot sleep, Mei Lin sits at that broken piano. She plays Chopin nocturnes and Liszt. Sound is terrible, of course. The keys are out of tune and some notes do not work at all, but the music is still there. It lives in her fingers and her heart. It does not need a perfect instrument to exist, and when she plays, she remembers everything. That girl she used to Beatty journey. She has taken the people who doubted her and the people who believed. She remembers that talent is not enough by itself. It needs courage, the courage to be seen, the courage to be heard, the courage to show the world exactly who you are. Mei Lin Chen learned that lesson on a spring afternoon in a small town auditorium. She has been teaching it to others ever since. And somewhere right now there is another child sitting at a piano, a child who is overlooked and underestimated, the child whose gifts are hidden from the world, a child who is waiting for the right moment to show everyone what they can do. Mei Lin hopes that child finds the courage. She hopes someone believes in them. She hopes they never give up, because the world needs their music even if it does not know it yet.